Chapter 12. A reason to stay, a reason to go. We sat together in compassionable silence for several moments more. I knew I should get up and either get something to eat or try to go back to sleep. But truth was, I wasn't sure I'd get back to sleep now that the city was awake and bustling with activity, and I was enjoying the easy tranquility. But those things never last. "Lainey, Lainey!" a clear, high voice called out. I smiled at the variation of my name. The elflings hadn't liked calling me Lane and had a hard time with the vowel pronunciation of Elena, so they'd taken to calling me Lainey. Legolas and I pulled away from each other to turn around. 3 small elflings ran up behind me while the elf of the trio, a precious little girl named Galadriel, climbed into my lap without hesitation. Grasping my hand, she pleaded brokenly, "Please, Lainey, play!" I laughed at her broken Westron. The elflings had been trying to teach me the prevailing language of Lothlorien, Quenya, but I was as hopeless as it was with it as I was with Sindren. The elflings were proving much faster at learning bits of Westron than they were at teaching me to understand them. Pulling Calahill's arms out wide, I laughed and spun her around, wrapping our arms across her stomach as she giggled. "Come on, Munchkin, we'll go find the others and play," I laughed. I used my arms to tumble her through the air as I stood, uncrossing her arms as I did so, and allowing her to land on her feet. She laughed and started tugging on my arms again, dragging me over to the 2 boys who watched eagerly, one of them holding a leather-wrapped ball. The oldest of the boys, Galadriel's 2 cousins, if I remembered correctly, enthusiastically held the ball out to me. "Soccer!" he declared as I took the ball. "You had someone make a soccer ball?" I laughed as I recognized the size and weight of the ball. Mostly I'd been playing games with the elflings that they were familiar with, but I'd been teaching them about hide-and-seek and other sports that were played in my world. Soccer and football were always favorites in the court because they could be played anywhere with very little equipment. I explained soccer to the elflings, thinking it seemed like the safer, easier choice of the 2, and told them I wish I knew how to fashion a soccer ball for them. It seemed the children beat me to it. "Teach us," the smaller boy said, grabbing my hand from Galadriel's and pulling on me. The little elfel immediately started chattering angrily at her cousin in Quenya. I tossed the leather ball back to the oldest boy and tugged on one of Galadriel's braids to get her attention. "Come on now, no arguing," I told her with a smile before scooping her into my arms and resting her on my hip. She was about the size of an 8-year-old child, and I knew elflings were much older. Heldar had explained that they looked like small children for around 50 years and didn't really reach adulthood until their first century had passed. Balancing Galadriel on my hip, I grasped the smaller boy's hands and turned to look at Legolas. "You gonna come play soccer with us for a while?" I asked with a grin. He laughed at the small elfling, continued tugging impatiently on my hand. "You still need to eat something, Elena," he reminded. I shrugged. "I'll grab something in camp. Maybe the hobbits will still be there and will want to play too." Seeing that I wasn't going to be stopped, at least not with 3 elflings tugging on me, he shook his head and followed along beside me. "I did not know what this soccer is," Legolas called curiously as he jogged to catch up to me. "It's a sport we played in my world," I explained. "Don't worry, I'll teach you." A thought came to me. "Hey, you speak Quenya, right? You translate for me as I explain it to the kids? They don't understand most of my words, so it takes a while to show them things." "Of course. I would be very pleased to assist you in this endeavor," he smiled. The elflings continued leading towards the center of the city, where a large open meadow stood, and the children gathered in to play most days. However, I made a quick detour into our camp, delighted to see the hobbits still there and eating. The smaller of the boys immediately released my hand and ran excitedly over to Merry and Pippin. "You guys want to come play a game from my world with us?" I asked as I looked over the tray of food set out. Sam immediately started pointing out things for me to try. "Course we'd love to. What game you going to teach them?" Sam asked as Merry and Pippin linked arms with the elfling and ran ahead with his older brother. I pointed at the retreating back of the taller elfling and the leather ball he carried. "Soccer. It's a pretty easy game to learn. You'll love it," I assured Sam as I grabbed a water skin and wrapped some fruit and bread into the cloth napkin. "Play soccer," Galadriel enthused as she bounced on my hip. Yep, let's go play soccer, I assured her as I started after her cousin. Legolas looked into my cloth napkin at what I was eating. Elena, you should have some meat or something more substantial than this, he admonished. I shrugged. I like fruit. After 2 years of not once tasting it, I like to eat as much fresh fruit as I can, when I can. I like meat just fine, but fruit and vegetables are still a rare treat to me, I explained. I wasn't really sure where they were getting fruit in winter, although a lot of it was dried, but I was still savoring every bite. Yet you have not eaten in more than a day. You need something more filling than fruit, he continued admonishing. I held up a piece of bread over my shoulder. Bread is pretty filling. Believe me, I'm fine. I've gone far longer than a single day without food. Every soldier has. And having actually been truly starved to the point of skin and bones before, I have no desire to purposely withhold food from myself. I do like to eat when I can. You were starved as well in your captivity? He asked in a hushed voice. I glanced at Galadriel at my hip, but she was still slightly bouncing as I walked and humming to herself, oblivious to what most of our words meant. My eyes trailed down to take in the sight of my own body, a body I will remember the sickly sight of after I escaped North Korea. I weigh about 140 now, a little heavier than most women my height, but I've gotten more muscle than them. But when I escaped, I weighed a little over 90 pounds. If I'd lost much more than that, I probably wouldn't have had the strength to even escape. I barely did as it was. His sadness and grief shone in his eyes and voice as he spoke. How did you escape? Galadriel stopped bouncing as she heard the catch in his voice and looked up at me curiously. I forced a smile and answered lightly. I got lucky. They got sloppy, thinking I wasn't a threat anymore, and sent only one guard to haul me out of my hole one day. I smiled. I smiled wider and bounced the elfling on my hip. Now, let's go play soccer, I told her as we stepped into the clearing. I collapsed on the sidelines beside one of the smallest girls of all the elflings. She'd come with her brother, but was too small to play soccer with them. She immediately climbed into my lap and began chattering to me and showing me her doll. Her words were still foreign to me, but I made loud appreciative noises as she tattered and held her doll. I was amazed by the open affection of the children of elves. They'd openly welcomed me into their play and showered me with the same affections they gave one another. I'd never been around kids much in my own world, but I vaguely remembered the hostility and fear I'd known as a child before I started avoiding the other children. Being different from them, I was openly castigated and ridiculed by the groups of kids. Such a thing didn't seem to happen here. The elflings played and occasionally fought with each other, but there was no malice in it, and they quickly resolved matters themselves with an adult having to interfere. They were even open and trusting to me, the strange human in their midst. Mothers had been a little more cautious, of course, but even they trust me now, no longer hovering nearby to watch me. I held the little girl in my arms as she brushed her doll's hair and realized how lucky I was to have been able to fight on their borders and defend this city and her people, her children, the innocents. Withstanding the grief of the blood I'd spilled was suddenly much easier when I saw these carefree children. I could internalize a little of that darkness and grief when I knew it helped to keep these children safe, and it allowed them to have a happy and carefree existence that I'd never known. Frodo stopped playing and sat beside us. The girl in my lap crawled over to sit beside her new audience and happily chatted with him. Since Frodo knew some Quenya, he happily chatted back with her. I was almost afraid to look at Frodo, and after what happened with the ring, afraid he would look into my eyes and know how weak I'd been. But when he turned to look up at me, there was only a happy smile lighting his face. So I returned to watching the game. The hobbits were about the same height as the taller elflings, but were surprisingly agile on their feet. So they split up on different teams, with Sam acting as a goalie for one of the teams. Being taller and faster, Legolas and I had carried some of the smaller elflings around as we played, letting them help us. As I took my breather, Legolas still played, carrying a little boy on his shoulders. I cheered as the two of them scored a goal on Sam, who was playing goalie in the makeshift net outlined with baskets. But, like clockwork, mothers came to fetch their children for the noon meal, and our game was stopped. I reclined in the grass as Mary and Poppin walked by, arguing over what the score was and which team won. Come now, Miss Lane. Mr. Legolas said you'd been skipping meals, and that won't do, Sam admonished as he stood looking down at me. I pushed up to my elbows to see said elf standing a little ways off, grinning at having carried through with his threat. Frodo laughed from where he still sat beside me. Now don't you be mad at Mr. Legolas. He's only looking out for you. Same as what I do with Mr. Frodo, and I'm going to make sure you both eat a decent meal for once, he continued admonishing, shaking his finger at both of us. Frodo and I both stood, laughing and offering a quiet, "Yes, Sam." I paused to kiss Sam on the forehead. Frodo and I couldn't ask for better friends than you and Legolas, I told the blushing hobbit. We returned to the campsite together. As always, food was already laid out, but Sam wouldn't take any himself until he was satisfied Frodo and I had more than our share heaped on our plates. Aragorn, Boromir, and Gimli were there too, and it was nice to once again share a meal all together. Even Boromir seemed in a bit better mood as Merry and Pippin excitedly explained soccer to the men and regaled them with the play-by-plays of the game. I was amazed at the speed in which the hobbits could make their food disappear. All too soon, they were off to explore the city more. But I was thankful to see that this time they were dragging Boromir with them. Maybe it would lift his spirits somewhat. Suddenly I was replacing my plate on the long table of food, Suddenly, as I was replacing my plate on the long table of food, Ethel stood at my elbow, bowing her head to me and speaking softly but at a furious pace. She repeated bowing her head several times as she spoke, then grasped my hand and kissed the back of it as well. I stared at the back of her bowed head as she continued her frantic words, completely baffling me by her actions. "She's thanking you," Haldar said as he walked closer. I looked up to see him drawing nearer while carrying the same girl who'd been showing me her doll earlier. "For saving her husband," Haldar continued, as he handed the girl to the Ethel, who finally was forced to release my hand. "Oh, you're Rumley's wife," I said, finally understanding. "Is yours your daughter?" I asked her. "Yes," Haldar answered for her, "and she's my niece." "Well, tell her it's no problem. I'm just glad he's all right," I replied. Haldar translated, and then the Ethel bowed again before hurrying away with her little girl. "Rumlin's really doing okay?" I asked. "My brother is very well. He mentioned his ear still rings, however," he answered with a raise of his eyebrow. I laughed and gestured to the gun on my hip. "Yeah, sorry about that. I guess they're a bit loud for your sensitive ears. When I saw Rumlin was in trouble, I just pulled it without thinking. I told Haldar about my guns and weapons in my world, but I didn't think he'd really understand them or how loud they were." Haldar waved it off. "I am certain he will be fine in time. Venya is certainly pleased with your swift action to save her husband." "I didn't realize Rumley was married. I thought he was your younger brother." "Both of my brothers are younger," Haldar laughed. "And both are married as well," he added. I looked him up and down. "But not you?" He laughed again. "Nay, not I. I have not yet found one who appeals to me." He returned the favor of looking me up and down. I looked away uncomfortably. Haldar cleared his throat though a twinkle remained in his eyes, obviously enjoying my discomfort. "I came by to see if you wish to accompany me. I must visit several of the warden stations along the border to ensure they are well supplied in the event of further orc attacks," he told me, stepping closer. "You were able to keep up quite well with my men on our trek to the northern border, and I wondered if you would care to keep me company. Playing soccer with the kid had actually energized me, and I looked forward to a chance at stretching my legs again and exploring the woods. "Sure, I'd love to," I told him. Turning towards my tent, I added, "Just let me grab my things." After donning the rest of my weapons, I was ready to head out with Haldar. Leaving my tent, I saw Legolas waiting for me. "Hey, we were going to head out and make some stops at the warden stations. You want to come with us?" I asked him. He stared at me for a moment, his face void and impassive. Then he slowly shook his head. "I cannot. I promised Gimli I would spend the afternoon with him. He wishes for me to show him the forgery and blacksmith. As dwarves are the masters of metalworking, he wished to see the skills of the Eldar." "Oh, that's too bad. But I mean, it's great you're spending time with Gimli. I'm glad you two aren't spending all your time trying to insult each other anymore." I laughed, genuinely happy with the development. I knew they would form a lasting friendship that would one day see them both through until they reached Valinor, and I felt privileged to see it blossom. "Are you certain you wish to do this, Elena?" Legolas asked slowly, stepping forward to grasp my hand. I looked at him curiously, but couldn't read anything in his face. "Yeah, I told you. I did a lot of scouting in the Marines. I want to feel useful while I'm here." I leaned forward and gave Legolas a quick hug. Have fun with Gimli, I whispered in his ear. Pulling away, I turned and jogged over to Haldar. He stared over my shoulder at Legolas for a moment, but when I turned to look, Legolas was already walking away. Shall we? Haldar asked. Haldar said, gesturing towards the path to the city gate. I nodded, and together we set off at a brisk jog. Over the next several days, Haldar and I jogged to the different warden stations and back each day. When we reached the station, we only stayed long enough for Haldar to talk to his men and assess their conditions before we started back for the city. When we returned each night, Haldar would send runners with the supplies they needed, or send more troops if he deemed his station needed more men to defend against the increasing threat of orcs. The next day, we'd begin again, heading out for a different station. The number of stations surrounding the border of the forest surprised me. These Galdrum didn't mess around when it came to protecting their lands, and I felt honored to be able to assist them. Haldar was surprised at how easily I was able to keep up with him, especially on jogs to the further out stations. Those trips took all day, and even at a steady jog there and back, we wouldn't return to the city until after nightfall. But not once did I fall behind. It felt like being in the Marine Corps again. I felt useful, like I was scouting with my partner, watching each other's backs. And Haldar was an easy-going companion, able to keep up light-hearted banter even at a steady jog, but also able to lapse into comfortable silence. And I relished not having this male constantly hovering because I was a woman, or suggesting I take easier tasks. He seemed to understand the deep-seated need I had to prove I could perform as well as the men, or Elyen, I guess. We finally stopped jogging one day at a spring to refill our water skins. I knelt to splash the cool water on my face, washing away the sweat and grime. Haldar crouched beside the water, pulling out a food wrapped in a cloth bundle. We usually ate as we jogged, but Haldar obviously decided we were making good time today. I took the opportunity to rebraid my hair, finger combing the loose hairs and tangles. My hair had filled with curls and waves from my sweat, so I pulled my hair over one shoulder and quickly started a herringbone braid near my ear. I always looked best when my hair was wild and full of waves to give it body. I have not seen such a braid before, Haldar commented as he ate. It is very beautiful. Thanks. I've never been good at doing anything elaborate with my hair. Women in the military are supposed to wear their hair up in a French braid or in a bun, but I could only ever manage a bun. So a herringbone braid is easy enough and looks pretty good too, I told him, as I finished the braid and tied a leather thong around the end. He handed me my share of food as I came to sit beside him. I spoke with the son of Arathon this morning before he left, Haldar suddenly said. Oh? What did Aragorn have to say? I asked. I was just thankful that over the last several weeks things had gone back the way it had been before between Aragorn and me. Or at least Aragorn had decided to pretend that nothing had happened between us. Not that I minded. He told that the Fellowship will be meeting this eve to discuss their departure tomorrow. My heart clenched at his words. Already? I asked in surprise. A month has already passed, Lane, he laughed. Sobering, he continued. Orcs have continued attacking our borders in increasing numbers. Lady Galadriel and Lord Selborne have said it's time for them to continue their journey. Oh, it doesn't seem like a month's gone by, I whispered, unsure what to say. Time passes unnoticed in an elven home, he answered. Many years can pass without notice in our realm. The years are not felt here as a mortal feels them in their homes. Haldar cleared his throat and looked away from me, gazing at the gentle flow of the spring. I asked the human if he would continue with them, but he did not know. He told the choice was yours alone, whether to continue on their path. I followed his gaze as I picked up my bread. My appetite suddenly gone. Instead, I threw bits of bread into the stream, watching small fish hungrily snatch at them. I don't know what I should do, or where I belong, I whispered. Haldar turned and grasped my hand in his. They were warm and calloused from shooting his bow, a lot like Legolas's hands, but I felt uneasy by the contact. I'd grown used to Legolas's touch, his closeness. This contact felt somehow strange and foreign. You could stay here, with me, Haldar whispered fervently. My attention immediately pulled away from our hands up to his imploring eyes. What do you mean? I gasped in surprise. I'd given up hope finding someone to share my life with. No Ethel has truly attempted has truly tempted me before. Never have I wanted to marry an Ethel whom I would never leave behind as I perform my duties. Long have I dreamed of finding a wife to stand and fight by my side, one who understands me and what I do. He cupped my cheek with one hand, and I couldn't help closing my eyes and leaning into that warmth. You have been happy here, he continued. I've seen the evidence of it. Your smile as you play with the Ethelings warmed my heart, and you could be ever at my side, fighting and defending our borders. My breath caught at his words. His offer was everything I'd wanted and could hope for. My husband had constantly fought with me over my military service, and I saw the handwriting on the wall in our arguments, saying we'd have the same fight if I quit and work with him as a cop instead. But Haldar had never tried stopping me from coming with him or fighting on the border, and after proving myself to him during the first battle, I knew he wouldn't hesitate to trust me again. But I'm not an elf, I told him, still astonished by his words. It does not matter to me. It matters not to me. No Ethel would stand at my side as you have. I craved that. Not an Ethel, he assured me. I'll die one day. Yet every day until then we could be happy. I shook my head, no words coming out, not knowing what to say. You have been happy here. You could stay and be happy with me, he repeated, his thumb stroking my cheek. My eyes closed once again at the sensation. Can I have time to think about this? I whispered. My eyes were still closed, but I felt Hildar's body moving closer. His lips pressed to mine in a surprisingly soft and chaste kiss. You shall certainly have your time, he whispered next to my ear, before he pressed another soft kiss to my cheek. As he withdrew, he pulled his hand away from my other cheek, and I finally opened my eyes to gaze into his. The open, earnest look in his eyes made me look away. Standing, I said, we should get back to the city. Of course, he replied. After entering the city, we silently went our own ways. I knew I had a lot to think about. Likely, I'd be up all night considering Haldar's offer. As I walked back into camp, I saw that the fellowship was gathering around the table nearest the fire. Aragon looked up as I got closer. Join us, he invited, gesturing to a bench beside him. We were discussing the continuation of our journey. I took the bench, smiling, when Gimli poured a mug and passed it to me. Beer? I asked in a pleasant surprise when I tasted the cool liquid in my mug. These elves are surprisingly hospitable, lass, Gimli laughed. He sounded like he'd sampled quite a bit of the beer himself. Have you any word of advice for our journey? Aragorn asked. I shook my head. I told you, I can't tell you what's going to happen or what to do. It would change things. I'm really sorry, I told Aragorn, laying my hand on his arm. He actually smiled kindly and placed his hand over mine. I know, he softly answered. I understand. I returned to happily nursing my beer as the others talked about their coming journey and what their path should be. I barely heard their conversation or their heated words as they argued about where they should go from Lothran. Instead, I stared at the ornately carved white wooden mug in my hands, considering what I should do. What I would do. Haldar's offer was more than appealing. I couldn't deny that. Part of me had always dreamed of finding a man like this, even if he was an elf. There was an easy, almost effortless companionship between us. We could laugh, play, and fight alongside each other with such ease. And hadn't I thought just a few weeks ago that Lothran was almost like paradise? Maybe this could finally be home. The idea was more than tempting. Realizing a silence had filled the air, I broke away from my musing and looked up around the table. The others were looking down at their mugs in silent contemplation. I looked up to see Legolas sitting across from me, a contemplative look on his face as he considered me. Shall you come with us when we depart, Elena? Legolas asked me. Course she will. Why wouldn't she? Pippin declared. The others looked at me curiously, waiting for my answer. I don't know, I answered honestly. You are certainly welcome to join us, Aragorn told me with a dip of his head. You have been a welcome companion. We are no longer the 9, Legolas broke in. With you, we would once again be the 9. Why would you not come with us? I looked down guiltily. Haldar has asked me to stay here, with him, I quietly admitted. A loud scraping noise startled me into looking up again. Legolas stood across the table staring down at me, a shocked look on his face, and the bench behind him shoved back from the table. And shall you? He whispered incredulously. I haven't decided, I admitted, staring up into his eyes and trying to read the emotion there. Before I could say anything else, he turned to stalk silently away from the table. You aren't coming with us? Mary asked in a quiet voice. I haven't decided, I repeated. Aragorn broke the heavy silence that followed. Whatever your choice, you shall be welcome to join us, but we shall be leaving in the morning. I nodded and stood from the table as well. Aragorn grabbed my wrist to stop me. If you choose to stay, Heldar is an honorable Ellen, but if you choose to come with us, you shall greatly please a number of our group. He released my wrist with an almost meaningful nod, and I continued away from our campsite, looking for somewhere quiet to think. Walking on autopilot, I came around the corner, walking towards the stream near our camp. I stopped when I saw Legolas already standing at the stream. Before I could turn around, he seemed to sense my presence and turned towards me. Rather than cowardly walking away, I closed the distance between us. Will you stay here, or will you come with us? Legolas immediately asked. I don't know. It's a tempting offer Heldar makes, I told him. Do you love him? He pushed, stepping closer until our bodies were almost touching. I sputtered, but couldn't come with an answer. You do not love him, he told me confidently, his eyes narrowing. His self-assured declaration only served to anger me. How do you know? Maybe one day I could love him. I pushed angrily on his chest, forcing him back a step. I don't belong anywhere in this world, and Heldar's offering me a place in it. I'd be a fool to pass that up. I could have a home here, an actual home, and I could be happy for once. Heldar wouldn't stop me from fighting by his side. I could be happy and useful. What about me? Legolas asked, as I felt a wave of sadness from him. He looked away. That is, what of the Fellowship? The hobbits and the others shall miss your presence if you stay. My heart lurched at his words against my will. My head told me there was nothing but friendship between us, but my heart yearned for something I feared to reach out for even a name. Heldar was fun and easygoing, but Legolas soothed and touched something within me I hadn't known could be reached. I stepped closer to Legolas again and reached out to clasp his hand between mine. The words screaming from my heart tumbled out before my head could censor them. Give me a reason to go. Give me a reason. He stared at me for a moment, and then his face fell. I cannot, he whispered. I dropped his hand and turned away. I guess that's my answer, I whispered in return, fighting the tears that suddenly threatened to fall. As I started away, Legolas grabbed my elbow and turned me partially towards him. My eyes were still closed against the pain, but I felt him press something hard and smooth into my hands. I barely caught Legolas' whispered words as I turned away again. I hope you find your happiness, Elena. Me too, I whispered brokenly to myself as my fist clenched around the object in my hands. Me too.